Michael Penix's future is so bright, you gotta wear shades.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, where you can start the season or finish the season with a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And of course, I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for so many years, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And I thank each and every one of you that go strong with me as every dayers. That means you make this podcast your first listen each and every day. And we come in every day. All you have to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So today's episode is, of course, a All-22 review for the Falcons' Week 16 win over the New York Giants. We'll talk trenches. We'll talk about the defense. But, of course, we got to talk about Michael Penix and the superior play that we got. And this has been obviously a big talking point these last couple of weeks with the potential switch to Michael Penix and why he was going to be so much better for this Falcons team and this offense than what we had been getting from Kirk Cousins this season. And you saw the Falcons kind of change their offensive game plan quite a bit from what we've seen in recent weeks with Kirk Cousins, with Michael Penix. You got more motion, according to Next Gen Stats. The Falcons ran 81% motion at the snap, which was their season high, which was 22% higher, than what they have run prior to that. They ran more play action this week. 20% of Michael Penix's dropbacks, had play action on them, and there were only 4 games during the first 15 games where Kirk hit 20% or higher. Those were weeks 2, weeks 3, week 6, and weeks 10. And, this game to me represented outstanding play calling from Zac Robinson. This is basically the offense that I wanted to see the Falcons run from the jump this year. And I think when you look at this game in isolation, it's exactly what you want to see from your play caller to help your rookie quarterback, be put in a position for success. My issue, however, is, when you apply the context of the previous week's 15 games, as well as especially focusing on those 5 most recent games with Kirk Cousins, I'm still wondering a little bit if the Falcons could have done a lot more of this type of stuff with Kirk Cousins. And the debate becomes, it's a couldn't versus a didn't. And I think the general narrative that I think will no doubt be sort of the overwhelming narrative was that Zac Robinson wasn't running some of these things that he ran against the Giants because Kirk couldn't run those things. And I tend to still believe that a lot of it is that Zac Robinson didn't run those things. And that's not to sit here and say that Michael Penix didn't show that he was more capable running a lot of those things than Kirk was, especially in recent weeks. He absolutely did. It's basically the idea that, Kirk was doing some of these things at a C+ level, and you put Penix in and he's doing these things at a B+ level. Now, I don't know if the C+ is, to me, a C+ is good enough that this is still stuff that you should be able to run with Kirk Cousins, but obviously it's not good enough for it to be sort of staple plays and whatnot, to make it, sort of the featured part of your offense. But it's still something that I think could be a regular part of your offense that you sprinkle in. And some of the examples that I'm talking about is like you saw a Yankee concept twice in this game, where you have that sort of the deep route and the deep sort of crosser over the middle of the field. And, there's a chance that they ran this without me making note of it. But the last time in my notes watching the film that I noted the Falcons running a Yankee concept was week 8, right? And it was that big catch to Chris Blair, and again, that shows with him being able to the zip and the touch and the accuracy and the placement on that football that Michael Penix showed on that particular play on that catch to Chris Blair in the second half. Those are sort of reasons why Penix is better at this stuff. But to me, it's not because Kirk couldn't run Yankee concepts, just Penix is better at it, right? You saw the split zone play action concepts, something that I thought and wrote about and talked about on this podcast, during the summer that I thought was going to be kind of the staple run play of the Falcons and their staple play action concept off of that because of Kirk's athletic limitations, right? That you couldn't run the play action concepts, the bootleg concepts off of outside zone. And you would instead see the Falcons run a lot more split zone. And you saw the split zone play action run twice in this game. You also saw the Falcons run split zone as a run concept on twice on their opening game script, something that they really haven't done really at all this season. And then you also saw like the touch pass to Ray McLeod in the third quarter. It's like those types of gadget plays were also things that I remember talking about during the summer of things that you could use for Ray McLeod consistently in the offense. First time the Falcons ran that, right? This season, that sort of touch pass. And for those of you not familiar, that's when Ray goes in motion and then Michael Penix takes a snap and just sort of taps the ball to him and he catches it and runs and whatnot. And so you didn't see that at all with Kirk in the offense. And you saw a lot more sort of shallow drags and shallow crossers in this sort of attacking the middle of the field, giving your young quarterback easy reads and easy throws to make. 5 out of the Falcons' 6 play action passes in this Giants game featured receivers running routes that were basically in breakers or running over the middle of the field. When you compare that to the Chargers game where they run like 7 play action concepts, and only 3 of those were, so basically were in breakers and whatnot. And so you're basically doubling the rate of sort of attacking the middle of the field play action concepts for Penix that you weren't necessarily doing for Kirk Cousins. And so, there were certainly plays in this game that I do think that Kirk couldn't run, like that one bootleg rollout that I don't think you could run that with Kirk. There was another play where Penix was able to escape a sack, roll off of a sack and throw the ball away. Kirk is probably fumbling on that particular play. But outside of those 2 plays and maybe 1 or 2 others, I don't know how many plays I would look at this game watching it and say Kirk couldn't do those things. It was just more that Kirk didn't do those things. But, as I said at the top, and as I'm sure you've heard elsewhere and will continue to hear elsewhere, this offense does look better with Michael Penix. That was something that I underrated going into this game, thinking, okay, like other than the bootleg stuff, what is really going to be dramatically different? Yes, the physical tools and whatnot, but in terms of, down the field throws, all those various things, not sure that Penix is going to be demonstrably better because like Kirk, I think is, an adjusted completion rate on deep passes this year is still top 10 quarterback in the league. But you did see those plays, right? You saw it a lot with sort of his connection with Darnell Mooney in this game, where you started to see more of those intermediate crossers, more of those deep outs and deep comebacks outside the numbers that were staple plays during Kirktober, right? When Kirk and this offense was cooking, that we saw consistently early and during the middle of the portion of the season that Mooney was consistently winning on. You haven't seen as many of those these last couple of weeks, and you saw those again, and that's a big part of why this offense was cooking. So again, Penix is much better on those throws than Kirk is at this point in time. And so again, to me, watching this film showed me, in my humble opinion, and again, I think the narrative is going to be that like Kirk is 90 to 100% to blame for the offensive shortcomings over these last 5 games. And I would say Kirk is probably more to blame for like 60, maybe 70% of the shortcomings, which is still a significant percentage. But again, to me, the play calling, not dialing up some of these plays, to me was that 30% and whatnot. But at this point, it's water under the bridge. No use crying over spilt milk, at least after today. It is what it is, all the cliches, but it's basically, this is what the Falcons offense is going to be moving forward. This is exactly what I hoped this offense would be heading into the season. And it's kind of just better late than never, right? Again, another cliche when it comes to that. And so if that's what it is, then it is what it is. And we can take what we get. Beggars can't be choosers, all that stuff and more. So last little tidbit I'll say is, I'll be curious to see what Washington does from a defensive game plan against Penix. With the man coverage, that was something we talked about heading into the game, where you expected the Giants to play a decent amount of man coverage to try to force Penix to throw some tight window throws. They did. At times, Penix was able to win. At other times, he didn't quite win. And so I'll be curious if Washington dials that up to sort of basically force the Falcons rookie quarterback in a big sort of game to have to make some big boy throws and whatnot. So that will be something to look at. We'll look at some of those man coverage plays. We'll look at several other plays that I'm discussing already on today's episode on the extended All-22 review. I haven't finalized all the plays I'm going to include in that, but right now I'm kind of like sort of circling like at least 20 plays that we'll break down in an extended All-22 review on Michael Penix. So we'll look at the majority of his dropbacks, if not all of them, in that extended All-22 review, so that you can see all these plays that I'm talking about the things that Penix did well, the things that, they could have done with Kirk that they weren't doing with Kirk, in crisp HD film and whatnot. And because of the holiday, I don't know if it's going to come out on its usual Wednesday. It might be Thursday or later this week for that. But you can still sign up today as a Locked On Falcons insider to get access to that extended all-22 review, right? Penix is going to take up all the oxygen in the room when it comes to that stuff, but there'll be other things on that we'll talk about on today's episode. But if you want to become a Locked On Falcons insider, hit the link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. It is free to sign up, 14-day free trial. So you can try it out. You can look at this extended all-22 review as well as the next one against Washington, and potentially, depending on how the schedule goes, maybe even that final one against Carolina in the next 14 days before you have to pay a single cent, which is only $4.99 per month thereafter if you like it. So check out that extended all-22 review. Again, a lot of feedback over the season and over the last year since we've been doing that with people enjoying that aspect. So make sure you sign up. Give yourself a Christmas gift by getting, becoming a Locked On Falcons insider and getting access to that extended all-22 review. But as I said, Penix is going to take up the bulk of that conversation. But there are other things that I want to talk about that stood out to me on the film that I think are worth discussing on today's episode, and we'll get into on that extended all-22 review for the Locked On Falcons insiders, including the Falcons' short yardage running game being so effective and why that was, as well as how did Kaleb McGary hold up protecting Michael Penix's blindside. And we'll get into all of that, guys, as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So the NFL playoffs are almost here, and it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And there's so many ways to get wins at FanDuel, whether you want to project who's the players that can score that touchdown, how many points each team is going to have, what type of score it's going to be, or just the straight up spread with the Falcons being 4.5-point underdogs this Sunday in their upcoming matchup against the Washington Commanders. Or maybe you're feeling great about Gunnar Duval Stockton from Tiger, Georgia, going to lead those Georgia Bulldogs as 1.5-point favorites over the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And of course, you can take advantage of that action by heading over to FanDuel.com. Make sure you join today, and it'll get your chance at $250 in bonus bets. So make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports book partner of the NFL. So let's talk trenches, and let's talk with the short yardage. I joked on Sunday in the rapid reaction that the Falcons, I think, were 6 of 7 in short yardage plays, with 2 yards or less to go in this game, in terms of their success rate and their conversion rate, all due to Michael Penix's, inspirational presence on the football field. But as you probably could guess, it really, after watching the film, it really had to do with not having Dexter Lawrence on the field. It's the no lanterns, no Kryptonians, and the Falcons were able to benefit from that, mostly because his replacements in Jordan Riley and Corey Dordon, weren't consistently winning up front, and that was allowing guys like Algier and Robinson to convert on those second and ones and third and ones and whatnot. And, I've been fairly critical of the Falcons blocking this year. It was nice to see, for the holidays, a team that could get a yard when they needed a yard, right? But I'm not necessarily convinced that that problem is going to go away, right? And so we'll see on that. Now, another thing that I wrote about for the Falcoholic this week or last week was about Kaleb McGary when it came to would he hold up against as Penix's blindside protector. I know there was a lot of concern about that with the switch from Penix. And there was a big challenge for him to deal with guys like Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau. And I only counted 2 pressures that he allowed in this game. I know PFF only had him with 1. None of those came from Brian Burns. And I know some of that is owed to Brian Burns not being 100% healthy at this stage in the season. But it certainly, benefits someone like me who's been, unwillingly and willingly stuck on Kaleb McGary Island for the past 4 years. This was a game where it's like, okay, this vacationing on this island is not nearly as bad as it can be. And I understand that, a lot of the criticism is because he's not the ideal option for that role. of protecting Penix's blindside, but I think on Sunday he did a good enough job, and that's kind of the hope that I'm having moving forward. There will obviously be challenges ahead. Dorrance Armstrong this upcoming week, Jadeveon Clowney the following week, so we'll see how he holds up there. But I bring that up just because I know there's an expectation among a lot of Falcon fans that when you look at the potential, I think it's $14.5 million in cap savings that the Falcons could have this offseason if they cut Kaleb McGary. Especially given their tight cap situation, like you look at that, and you're being like, man, that's going to really move the needle for us. That's too enticing to pass up, especially given we know that McGary is limited in terms of what he can be as that blindside protector. But I think one of the things that you've heard me talk about also on this podcast is, I think there's a need for this run scheme to change. And regardless of who your starting five is, and we've discussed also, do the Falcons move on from Drew Dalman this offseason, who is a free agent as well, their starting center, that you're going to need this run scheme to change, right? And you look back at these last 3 years, you've seen a lot of variance in this Falcons rushing success, right? In 2022, they were basically a top 5 rushing team. In 2023, they were basically a bottom 5 rushing team. This year, they've kind of rebounded. I think I would probably call them like a top 12 rushing team this year. And I think the reason why you see that high variance is owed to sort of how one note they are as a run blocking team. They're very much, an outside zone oriented team by far. Like they're running outside zone at like twice the rate of the league average, right? It's like 56% or something. When I wrote about it like 2 weeks at the Falcoholic, it was like 56%. And like the league average is like somewhere around like 23, 26%, somewhere around there. And it's basically the idea of this team is, has one pitch. It has let's say it has a good fastball. And if you go up against a team that can't hit your fastball, like you'll see this run scheme be very effective. However, against better defenses, and when we talk about this team and hopefully the future that they have, whether it's this year or into the future of being a playoff team, the odds are higher that you're going to face a defense that can time that fastball and hit that fastball. And that's why you have this high variance where it's like, if you only have one pitch, and the batter, so to speak, can hit that pitch, you have no pitches at that point in time. And that's kind of where I think why you've seen sort of this high-low sort of situation with the Falcons the last couple of years with their run scheme. And so I think you vary up your run scheme in order to add more pitches to your repertoire, so to speak. And so I bring up Kaleb McGary because I think he's going to be a part of that future if the Falcons vary their run scheme, just because he's the guy that is most skilled at sort of running a more varied run scheme when it comes to outside zone, inside zone, gap, power, all these various things. He is that guy that has the sort of physicality to be able to work in any running scheme, and I've kind of described Kaleb McGary over these last couple of months as he's like the bouncer, right? If you want someone to get thrown out of the club, he's the guy that you go to and he's like, yes, boss, I'm going to throw that guy out of the club. And so he's the one guy on this offensive line that is like that. And I think you need that type of presence if you want to have this sort of rushing success into the future. And so I certainly think when it comes to the future of the right tackle as well as the left tackle position, the Falcons absolutely this offseason need to start planning for life after Kaleb McGary and Jake Matthews. That another offseason where they pass on an offensive tackle in the draft for like, I've been pushing for this for like 3 years now. It to me would be an egregious mistake by this team. But I say that I don't think life after McGary or Jake Matthews should begin in 2025. That to me is more of a 2026 issue at this stage and whatnot. So, we'll spend a lot of time over the next 9 months talking about Michael Penix being the savior. And certainly his performance on Sunday against the Giants is basically just throwing gasoline on that fire with how well he played on Sunday. But I think ultimately this team's future team success is going to go beyond the quarterback, and especially for a young quarterback. And you can ask Matt Ryan about this, that if you have a high-level run game, right, and I think the Falcons have a good run game, but not necessarily a high-level one because they're so one-note, it's going to take a lot off the plate of that young quarterback in the future. And so that is something I hope to see this team do and address this offseason. And so, we'll sprinkle in some of those short yardage and McGary plays in our comprehensive Michael Penix breakdown for the Locked On Falcons insiders on that extended All-22 review. So again, hit that link in the description below. But let's wrap up today's episode talking about the defense, talking about my 4 big takeaways watching the film of this defense, including how the Giants' poor coaching contributed to the Falcons' defensive success. And we'll get into that as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So today's episode is sponsored by Prize Picks, and if you love watching the game, you're going to love Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy. And whether it's football, basketball, or any of your favorite sports, Prize Picks is here to make your holidays bigger and brighter, and you can now win up to 1,000 times your money on your entry over at Prize Picks. And this holiday season, they're giving over $30+ million in rewards during Pixmas and offering 2 free picks in the month of December. And you have, I think, one more day to get in on this Pixmas action. It closes after, I think, midnight on Christmas Day, and that's going to be your last shot at the millions of dollars that they're giving away. And we have 2 Christmas Day NFL games, and I've already I'm going to take my shot on, I went less on George Pickens getting 64.5 receiving yards. I went more on Derrick Henry getting half a touchdown. That's how easy it is with Prize Picks. Take your shot today. Whether it's the NFL or the NBA games, more on Luka Doncic or Steph Curry or whatever on points scored or rebounds, whatever it is. So to take advantage of this action, head on over and download Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $50 instantly after your first $5 lineup. Again, that's right, $50 instantly when you just play $5. It's guaranteed. You don't even have to win. Prize Picks, run your game. So one of the benefits of being a Locked On Falcons insider, in addition to getting access to these extended All-22 reviews, is basically I gave the Locked On Falcons insiders my 4 biggest takeaways about the defense, hours and or potentially days before many of you guys are listening to this. So that's another reason to sign up in addition to that extended All-22 review. And basically those 4 takeaways, and we'll elaborate further on them, is number 1, shout out to Brian Daboll for abandoning the run game for no reason. Number 2, the Giants screen game was very effective in the first half, but the Falcons shut it down in the second half. Number 3, AJ Terrell didn't shadow Malik Nabers as much as I expected, only on key downs like third downs in the end of half, Hail Mary situations, etc. And then number 4, I'm not sure a single running back was able to block Kaden Ellis whenever he blitzed. I tallied a sack, 2 pressures, 2 hurries, and a quarterback hit that was nullified by penalty. So let's elaborate further on those 4 biggest takeaways. With the first 2, talking about the run and screen game, the Giants put together obviously one scoring drive in this game. It was a 14-play drive at the end of the first quarter. They ran the ball 7 times on that drive. They threw the ball 7 times on that drive. They had a 100% success rate on their 7 runs, averaging almost 5 yards a carry. They had 4 of those 7 passes were screen passes. They had a 100% success rate on those screen passes, averaging 7.5 yards per attempt. But for whatever reason, after that drive, the Giants went away from it. Their next 2 possessions before they got to the 2-minute drill before halftime, they ran a total of 10 offensive plays. How many of those were runs? 2. How many of those 8 passes were screen passes? Just 1. And again, it was a successful play for 10 yards. And so I say thank you, Brian Daboll, for going away for what was working for you. And then they tried to go back to the run game and the screen game after halftime, making that mid-game adjustment. Their first snap of the third quarter was a run play, and David Onyemata and Eddie Goldman helped clog that up for a 3-yard gain. Their second snap was a screen pass. That was the one that Zach Harrison tipped into the waiting arms of Matthew Judon for that pick 6. Then their next series, they started with another screen pass. Zach Harrison came unblocked, forcing a throwaway in that particular play. Then second down, Zach Harrison, that is, and Kaden Ellis were able to clog up the run. And then the third down, D. Alford was able to break up a pass to Wan'Dale Robinson. And so the Giants did run a couple more screens the rest of the game. I think they ran 3 more, were successful on 2 of them. But basically, going back to what I said, they were successful early in the game, 5 of 5 in terms of their success on screens in the first half, and then only 2 of 5 in the second half. And shout out, a lot of that was to Zach Harrison. I'm sorry, not Zac Robinson. No credit goes to, no, I'm kidding. But yeah, he basically was a one-man wrecking crew at a certain point in this game when it came to a lot of that stuff and sort of beating the allegations when people were pushing for him to move at edge. And he was making a lot of these plays as an interior guy. And, this is why, to me, keeping him inside made a ton of sense, because you're seeing a similar sort of parallel trajectory for Zach Harrison at the end of this season, where you have really seen him step up and make a lot of key plays. The safety a couple of weeks, or was that last week, against the Raiders and whatnot, and being that disruptive presence in the interior, like we saw as a rookie when he was playing as an edge rusher behind Calais Campbell. And you saw him really come on strong over that last month of the season. And I feel like we're seeing the same thing with him. And this is exactly, again, why, moving him back to edge to me did not make a ton of sense if his long-term future, which I think should be more clear to everyone now than ever, but if you weren't listening to Locked On Falcons, you're late to the party. But as an interior presence, and so knocking the Giants' game plan. I don't say this to basically take away from the Falcons' defense. Outside of that one drive, the defense did an excellent job executing defensively. But this is why, I feel like a lot of this is on the Giants, because it, to me, perfectly summarizes why they're a 2-win team. That if they were a better coached team and weren't completely abandoning the things that were working, they'd probably be 3 or 4 wins better. Now, I'm sure there are certain people in the Giants organization that are, glad that the Giants are potentially going to have the number 1 pick so that they can get their quarterback situation resolved. I don't know if Brian Daboll is one of those people, because I don't think he's going to be around to take that quarterback, but we'll see. So the third thing I talked about was AJ Terrell shadowing Malik Nabers. He did do it a couple of times, but we didn't see it nearly as much as I thought we would. And it makes me kind of wonder if we'll see it this week with Terry McLaurin, with the Falcons going to Terry McLaurin's house. Nabers had 15 targets in this game if you include the plays that were nullified by penalties. 3 of them were with AJ Terrell being the primary man in coverage. 7 were with Mike Hughes, 2 D. Alford, 2 Clark Phillips, 1 for Matthew Judon. And to be fair to Hughes, 4 of those targets came at the very end of the game when Kevin King got knocked out of the game and Hughes had to go back in to replace him. But on the 3 previous targets where Hughes was on Malik Nabers, he only gave up 1 catch on the screen pass, and then I think also had a pass breakups. I think he also had a pass breakup in those final 2 minutes as well on one of those targets as well. So Mike Hughes did hold up much better against Malik Nabers than we thought he would, right? Which was one of the reasons why we were like, put AJ on him. We don't want to have a repeat of what happened in Minnesota. So credit goes to Mike Hughes and the rest of the Falcons secondary, D. Alford as well, for not letting, their opportunities when they went against the Giants' number 1 wide receiver to have a problem like we saw a couple of weeks ago. But, I think this week against Washington, I think we still, I know I am, and I'm sure many of you still would prefer to see AJ against Terry McLaurin as much as possible. Now, Scary Terry, as he's often known as, has given AJ some problems this year, but I went back and looked it up. They've met 3 times now over the last 3 years each. And it was really just last year that Terry McLaurin was really beating AJ Terrell specifically, right? That you look at last year based off my charting, AJ gave up 4 catches on 6 targets for 63 yards to Terry McLaurin. And then the 2 previous years combined, he only gave up 1 catch on 3 targets for 3 yards with a pass breakup. So, a lot of that success that Terry McLaurin was having in 21 and 22 was against other DBs in the Falcons secondary. But still, I do think, you don't want to have another Viking situation that has put the fear of God in all of us, right? And so I think it'll be easier for the Falcons to ask AJ to shadow McLaurin if they want to, just because McLaurin spends, I think, according to PFF, about 75% of his snaps lined up as that left outside wide receiver. So you can just kind of park AJ as the right outside corner this week, where he normally, I think, is technically like the left outside corner. But you could just park him and trust that, at least 75% of the time you're going to have your best corner against their top receiver. So I'll be curious to see if the Falcons are more willing to do that against Washington than they were against the New York Giants. But last tidbit was just Kaden Ellis being Kaden Ellis. We've seen this, no elaboration necessary, because we've seen this so many times over the last 6-7 weeks of the season. I still occasionally see some people that are like, let's move Kaden Ellis full-time to edge. And I just think those are people that don't understand how Kaden Ellis wins. There have been times where he has beaten offensive tackles. I can think of that Minnesota game where there was one rep where he got where I think Judon had the cleanup sack, where Kaden Ellis got the pressure against Cam Robinson. But his win rate against running backs is so much higher than it is against tackles. Like he gave in that Vikings game, he gave Aaron Jones, he gave him that work, as the kids say. And again, I'm pulling these numbers from my butt, but it's basically like, to me, it's like when you put Kaden Ellis one-on-one against a running back as a blitzer through that A gap as an off-ball linebacker, he's winning like 60-80% of the time. Now you put him against an offensive tackle, that win rate is going to drop to like 20 to 30%. Again, I'm making up those numbers, but that feels right based off of the film I've seen. So, I think it's all about playing to a guy's strengths, right? And that's kind of the larger narrative of this game, right? The Falcons did that, and I think that was a big reason why they were successful, right? We're talking about Michael Penix's strengths. We're talking about not necessarily playing to Kirk's strengths. Now, that's been my criticism these last couple of weeks, is I don't think you're playing to Kirk's strengths. Now, your response, of course, is like, what strengths, based off of how Kirk has played over the last 5 games? And I'm like, that's fair. But I think with Zach Harrison playing inside, Kaden Ellis being that sort of off-ball blitzer and whatnot, and talk about the offensive line, right? I think that's one of the reasons why they run so much outside zone, because it's playing to the offensive line strengths. But what hopefully they will be able to add more strengths to that in the future by varying up that run scheme. So, it's a great place to be, guys, having some of this positivity on the podcast. I don't know if this is going to last, beyond this week. We'll see, I guess. We'll see how Sunday turns out. But it is at least nice to have this thing back on track for at least a week here on the podcast. And we can feel like, man, we're back heading in the right direction as an organization, where it just didn't feel that way over the last, month or so. So, again, beggars can't be choosers with the Atlanta Falcons. You got to take what you can get, all that stuff. But it is at least nice that we had this week. And so we can talk positively about all the things the team is doing offensively, defensively, and elsewhere, at least for one game this season. So, we'll see what's what. Obviously, tomorrow will be a crossover Thursday. I don't know if I'll post that on Wednesday evening like I normally do on YouTube, or just wait till Thursday morning where the audio is going to post, since I know, I'm sure there are a couple of you sickos that are like, I'm going to step away from my family on Christmas Day, Aaron, to watch that episode. And I'm just like, you absolute sickos. And again, I ain't mad at you. Keep getting me those checks. So we'll see what I ultimately decide on that. But that will be your next episode, Crossover Thursday, previewing that upcoming matchup against Washington. Continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, Locked On NFL is going to have you covered all week long for what's going on elsewhere in the NFL. And Locked On NFL is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.